Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at uploading multiple images to a Rails API where it's stored using active storage. This is going to be done with a React front end. You could do this with pretty much anything. It's just going to be some basic JavaScript and a little bit of like React refs, but aside from that it's pretty much the same thing. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and, well, I guess we can test it real quick. We can try to upload a couple pictures. We'll just throw in, I don't know, like this Minecraft picture and one of the cat pictures and maybe this other cat picture. So we'll upload all three of those. We'll click submit, get sent to the backend, and you'll notice here that nothing updates, but we do get a response back here where the ID is 7. So if we put 7 into here and then we click get images, that should get those 3 pictures. So we can see they're stored in the backend. We come over here, we can see that there are 7 items. If we go to /post/7, hopefully, you'll see that we get 3 different links displayed here, which is all of our active storage URLs. If I click on one of these, like here's the Minecraft one, and I can click on another one, it's going to be one of the cats, right? So that's pretty much all we're going to do. It's pretty quick, pretty easy if you do the right things in the right order. Otherwise, it's a massive headache, so hopefully I can guide you through this. I'll go ahead and CD out of the demo application and we'll create a new one. So to do this one, we're going to do a Rails new video --API, and then we'll go ahead and CD into that. The backend portion is usually pretty simple. So we'll CD into our video. We'll do a Rails G scaffold post, give each post a title, even though that's not really required. So maybe we'll just leave it off. We'll just leave it, yeah, we'll leave it blank for now. We'll generate the scaffold. And then we'll do a Rails active _storage : install command. And then after we're done with that, we can do a, I guess we have to do a code dot to open this up in VS Code because there's a couple gems we have to uncomment and we have to mess with our course configuration. So go ahead, we'll move this over here. We'll come into our gem file, and just to be safe, we can uncomment the image processing and the rack-cores gem. And then go ahead and run a bundle command to install these gems, hopefully. We can then come into our config, initializers, and our cores.rb. We can uncomment all of this. And then you can either choose to allow list the specific IP you're using, which in our case would be localhost port 5173, or you can allow everything if it's like a public application that you're using. Maybe then you like filter by the API key, right? So in my case, that's what I'm gonna do, but you could also just like grab your IP and put your IP in here if you wanted to. That way only like your client could access it. Okay, so we have that. Now what we can do is we can come into our app, our models, and our post.rb. Inside of our post.rb, this is where the code starts happening. We tell it that it has many attached images. We hit Control+ one more time so you can actually see this. So the has many attached images will set up the active storage associations for us, and it'll pretty much handle all of the backend magic. We now need to go into our controller, and in our controller, we need to actually tell it like how to handle these images. So if we come down to the bottom, we have our post parameters, and the way these are usually structured isn't with a fetch, it's with a require for a post, and then it has a .permit for whatever you want in here, like your title or your body. In our case, we're not going to be doing a title and a body. Instead, we're just going to have some images, which are going to be an array. So if you only have one image, you're going to have something like :image. We've covered this before in a video for like attachments with only one image. But in this case, because we're covering multiple, we need to do images : and then the array. Once that's done, we can then come up to our show. And in our show, we have to sort of refactor this a bit, because right now it's going to be returning just a post. Which when we went to the home page here, you probably saw it. It only had the ID, the title, the created at, and the updated at. It didn't have this images array. And the reason is, out of the box, this is going to give you the stuff that's like clearly defined on the model. It's not going to give you all of your nested associations or whatever. And the way that we can get around this is we can call on our post a .as JSON, and we tell it to include the images. Now, the issue with including the images is we also have to grab the URLs for each image. Because if we just do it like this and then we try to start our server again, I'm actually going to CD out of here and back into the demo app and then run a Rails S so we can take a look at this. If we come over here to /posts, we can see we have all of these. And real quick, I'll just edit the demo app here to in our show page. If we go to like /posts/1, I think that has some URLs. I'm going to get rid of the section that handles it and make it match this code right here. So I'm just going to copy this, paste this in, and then hopefully refresh, and then you'll see what happens. So now we get the attachments, same as before, but you can see here it's going to give us some JSON that just has like the ID, the name, the record type, the IDs for the record and the blob, and then the created app. So the way that we actually get it to give us the URLs, and I'm not entirely sure if this is the correct way to do it, this is just the way that I managed to figure out how to do it, is we call a .merge, and then we go through the images, and we set the images to be the @post.images.map do image, and then inside of that we just call a, in my case, a URL for the image. And then we can say end, and then we can go ahead and close this. So once I had something like this, it turned it into, if I save this over here in my other window, it turned it into these images like this. So we can now go ahead and CD back into the video project, because at this point we have our show set up. We just need to sort of deal with the images being created. So we're not going to cover like updating them, but it's going to be the same process essentially. So in my case, I had a set of titles, and what I did was I told it, hey, here's your post params except the images. Because the images we need to handle in a special way, we can't just associate them and attach them straight to the post. So what we do is we tell it to exclude them for the sake of creating the new post. And then if you have like a title and a body, that still goes in here just like normal, so you don't have to deal with it. But then for our images specifically, we tell it has some params with the post and the images. We grab those, and then we loop through these. So first we check, does the image exist? So we say if images, and then we do a images.each do image, which is a bit redundant, but we check, or we go through each of the images and we call @post.images.attach, and then we attach the image that we've been provided to us. And this sort of works because of how we're handling it on the front end, which we'll take a look at in a second here. Once we're done with this, we're pretty much done with the Rails app portion of this. You could come through and you could do your update as well. You'd have to change this from like a .update to a .save, and you'd have to do something similar where you grab the images and then you like reattach them if you want to. In our case, we're not covering that though, so we're just going to leave it here. Now we're going to create our front end. So in this case, we're going to do a npm create, I think it's vite at latest is what we run. And then that'll ask us to create a project. I'll call it client. We'll go down to React, but again, it doesn't really matter. We'll use JavaScript. We'll cd, or I guess we'll do a Rails S in this window. And then we'll go ahead and we'll copy this and open up another window. So we'll run a Rails S here. We'll go over to another window. I'll just stop this one, and I'll cd into that directory. Once we're in here, we can then go ahead and cd into our client. And then once we're in our client, what we can do, I'll zoom in a bit, is we can run a npm install with the npm I command. That'll install all of our vite dependencies for the React app, and then we can do a npm run dev, and at this point, we're pretty much done with that portion of it. So we come over here, we now have our vite app. Cool. So let's come over to our side panel. Let's close our cores, our gem file, our post, and I guess we can leave our controller open for now, but we are going to come into our client folder. In our client folder, we're just going to do everything inside of the app.jsx, because again, we're not really here to look at the React side of things. So we'll just clear everything out of here. We'll get rid of the counter. We can get rid of the logo. We'll keep the use state. Actually, there's a couple things we're going to be using in here. I think we also use ref is the other one. So let's just go ahead and include that right now so we don't have to deal with that in a minute here. We're now going to define our API URL. Let me hit Control+ one more time. Seems a bit small today. So we use the API URL. We then tell it we have a const set of images that we're going to use our state for, which is just an array. We then have two refs that we're going to use. It's going to be a images ref, which is where we store our images, and then it's going to be the post to get, which is just how we're doing that like click to get post thing. It's not ideal. It's definitely not how you would want it to work in like a real application probably, but for the sake of testing, it just allows us to get a specific post. Otherwise we'd be getting all the posts, which is kind of not great for testing purposes, right? Okay, so now that we have that, we can come down to our return here, our render, and we can start by sort of scaffolding out what we want this to look like. So we're going to have our upload form. We're then going to have our get images button. And then the last section is going to be the actual rendering of the images. So for the upload form itself, it's pretty straightforward. We create a form. It has an input of type file with a name of images a multiple, and a ref set to the images ref. We then have a button that does an on-click, and the on-click is a handle upload method. So what does that handle upload look like? Well, this is where we start getting into some of the nitty-gritty. So we can come up here, we can define this. For our handle upload, we prevent default, just to make sure we're not redirecting or anything. We then create some form data with a new form data. And then we call, in my case, this was sort of how I was doing the title. I call a form data.append because we're actually going to be passing back the entire form data object. We're not going to be doing the headers of type JSON. And that's just because with that setup, I was running into some issues, and this was sort of how like the Stack Overflow type answer I ran into covered how to do it. You just conform to the, I guess it was a blog post, not Stack Overflow, but you get the idea. You conform to the Rails standard, which is sort of how it's created in the Rails form. Or just does a post, and then inside of some brackets, it does like the name of the parameter, and then you have whatever the value is. So for the post title, or like the body, that's going to be pretty simple. You just put the name of the field in there and then your data. But for our images, we actually have to go through our images ref. We have to go through each of the files, and then for each of the files, we have to put the, instead of having like the post title here as our parameter, we have the post images, and then it's an array. And then we do a comma, and then we use our images.current.files, and we grab each of those files and we append it to the form data with this as like the argument. We can then call a post data method here, or function, whatever you want to call it. And we can come down here and we can take a look at that one. So our post data takes in some form data, and it does a fetch request with a method of post. It goes to our API URL, which is just localhost port 3000, and then /post, because that's our endpoint. Give the method of post a body of just the form data. We don't do anything else because it's already been formatted with the appropriate parameters here. We can then call a .then with the response, cast it to JSON, and then once we have that data, we can console log it, and we can call a get images if we're so inclined. You also can just like return the images once you're done here. So like in our post create, when you get down here, when you render the JSON for the post, you could also just render this and then do something similar, or render like your post.all if you want to. In our case, we just call get images again, because again, it's not really the point of the application to do this as efficiently as possible. It's mostly just to see how this works. So actually getting the images is where our post to get comes in. So what we do is we call a fetch with the API URL, the post, and then the post to get current value. So this is getting a specific ID. So it's like localhost port 3000 /post/1 or /2, right? So when you do this response here, you're not actually going to have whatever the last ID of the thing is. So you're going to be getting just like whatever you were previously getting. You could, if you had your response, sort of circumvent this and maybe just add the images to the set images right here. So your use state. Instead of getting a specific image again. Or you just pass back like the ID and then call get images if you wanted to do it that way. But then you're doing like 2 requests, which seems a little bit silly as well. But okay, so we do the fetch to get the current image. We then do the same thing, response to JSON, call data, and then we set images to the data.images. So this is sort of how we are dealing with the fact that on load, we want to get like a set of images, but we don't want to get like all of the post images, right? So if we load up the application, if you were to go to like /posts on load instead of specific post, if we come over to our controller, we would just get the like all of the posts. So we would then have to do something similar to this, where we grab or we cast it to JSON, then we include the images, and then we merge each of those posts. Or I guess we'd have to do the post for each of the posts, and then include the JSON for each of the posts, and then merge the images for each of the posts, and then map the image URLs for each of the images for each of the posts. And you get the idea. So in our case, we're just doing it with a hard-coded ID. We then set the images that way. And we can come down here and we can take a look at how we're actually using this. So in terms of getting the images with the button, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a div with an input of type number, a ref of post to get, and then just a placeholder that says here's your ID to retrieve, and then we have the on click to get the images. So if we save all this, we can come over here and we can just take a look at what this looks like. Now we're not actually retrieving them yet, so we do need to still implement that, but you get the idea. Here's our choose files, here's our submit, our ID to retrieve, which is where we just put in the ID, and then our get images button. Okay, so in terms of the actual images themselves, pretty straightforward as well. It's just a div where we give it a class name, doesn't really matter. And then we iterate through each of our images as a map with the image and the index. We create a image tag, and then we give it a key of the index so React doesn't yell at us. We give it a source of the image itself, because as it iterates through these, it's going to get the URL. That's where the source is applied here, so it's just the URL to the image. We give it an alt, and then we give it a style of 200 by 200 just so that we can actually see the things. So if we do that, we come over here, we come over here and we refresh, and we come over to our backend. We can run our pending migrations. We can see here we don't have any posts yet. So if we come here, we just have an empty array. So let's try to actually upload some stuff. We'll grab the Minecraft picture and the cat pictures. And if we click, or if we hit Control-Shift-I first of all and come over to our console, we can just take a look at this, make sure things are working. If we click Submit, we can see here we get an error where it says, cannot read properties of undefined map. The reason being we, right now, we don't have the images yet. So if we refresh now and we try to do this, we can now get the images, and we should no longer run into that issue just because our ID was a little bit out of sync with how we were doing it. So let's go ahead and let's post Conan. We'll do a submit, and now we're not getting that error anymore. Again, you'd probably want to like clean up the logic here a little bit in terms of how the React stuff is handled so you don't run into that error. But now we can run over to 2, do a get images, and there's our Conan, and we can come back to 1 and it works just like before. So that's sort of how we're doing it all. It's pretty, it's actually not that bad. It's pretty straightforward. It just requires a little bit of creativity with like how you want to handle the getting and the setting of the images. But in our case, we can just do it like this. So we choose another file and we can like upload, I don't know, let's just go with like this concerns versus helpers. We'll open this, we'll submit it. We can go take a look at it. It's post number 3. Looks awful, but it works, right? So yeah, that's all I just wanted to talk about today. Just a quick little play app that it shows you how to use like active storage for multiple images, because I did have a comment asking about it the other day. So yeah, hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully it was helpful, and hopefully I will see you in the next tutorial.